Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome back to my channel. I recently took a trip to Iceland, just a small trip, like 5 days, and I wasn't sure if I was going to make a vlog or not. I did end up making one, and this clip is just because I didn't film anything before I went, so I wanted to make the video not feel weird and abrupt. So yeah, this is a little vlog from my trip there. I read 3 books, so I'll show you what I got up to there, and then we'll come back and I'll review the 3 books that I read on my holiday.
Then we're going to count to 3. We're going to smell it, we're going to raise our toothpicks into the air and say, smell, remember, and then put this in your mouth and chew 5 to 10 times. Ready?
Cheers.
Thank you. You're welcome. Strong?
I don't like shots very much.
Oh!
Hello, reporting live from my Reykjavik hotel room. I wasn't actually going to make a vlog out of this holiday. I have been filming some bits, but it was just going to be like a video for me and Matt to enjoy and remember our holiday with. But I think there's enough stuff, enough footage that I can couple together a nice little vlog. And so I thought I'd give you a quick update from our hotel room and tell you about what we've been getting up to and what we have been eating and doing and what I've been reading. It's actually like day 4 of the trip, is it? We're going home tomorrow, but not until the evening, so we've still got a reasonable amount of time left. So far, we've been on a food tour, which was really interesting. Got to try lots of different dishes that are local to Iceland. They have this great fish called Arctic char, which we've had a few different ways. We had it cured, we had it pan-fried. That was delish every time. We did try some lamb, so they have a lot of lamb on the island. That was also very, very nice. And I did try fermented shark, which I didn't know what to expect. It sounded like it was going to be wet. And then when I saw it, it looked quite dry, like a little cube of dried ham. And it was quite squidgy. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't exactly pleasant. Like, I wouldn't go in for more. And then we had that with a shot of this local spirit called Brennivin. It's a drink that, if you are familiar with liquors, it's quite similar to like Sambuca or Ouzo. It's got that sort of licoricey medicinal taste. That I probably enjoyed less than the shark, because that's not really the sort of flavour I go for. But yes, the food has been really interesting. Reykjavik seems like a really foodie city. It's also a very cold city. We don't go on many cold weather holidays, but this has certainly been one of those. It's been, I think, like between 0 and 5 degrees most of the time we've been here, but the wind is so strong that it feels about 10 degrees colder than it actually is. So we have been wrapping up warm. We have been pelted by hail and snow and rain. Umbrellas are sadly not that useful here because of the amount of wind, but it's not been a big problem. It's been nice to experience something a little bit different. Anyway, what have I been reading? I started on the plane and finished sort of the day after Eurotrash by Christian Kracht, translated from German by Daniel Bowles. This I enjoyed well enough. I think my problem is that there's a lot it's doing and a lot of cleverness that I'm not really equipped to appreciate. There's lots of calling back to Kracht's debut novel, Fatherland, which has never been translated into English. I expect that if Eurotrash's success in the International Booker, for which it has just been longlisted, if that translates into sales, then perhaps more of his work will be translated into English. But I think it's very much in conversation with that work. There's lots of allusions to other famous German authors that I haven't read, and so it was just quite hard to pick up on a lot of what I suspected was doing. I could see the ripples on the surface of the sea of my reading, if that makes any sense, but I couldn't really see the depths of it. So I liked it, I didn't love it. Then yesterday I read Boulder by Eva Baltasar, translated from Catalan or Spanish by Julia Sanches. And this is partly set in Reykjavik, which is why I brought it with me. And I absolutely loved this. I thought it was just beautifully written. It is amazing to me that this is a translated work. I think it's so well written that it's hard to not think this was originally written in English. And then at the moment, I'm reading my book for Simon Savage's and Louise Savage's Savage. How many times can you say Savage in 30 seconds? Savage prompt for March, which is to read a book with a utensil on the cover. And this has got a knife here, but it is The Natural Way of Things by Charlotte Wood. I was drawn to this because I loved Stoneyard Devotional when it was longlisted for the Booker last year. It was a very unexpected treat for me. And so I was keen to read a bit more of Charlotte Wood's work. And I'm about halfway through this at the moment. It's about some women who are essentially abducted and wake up in this remote ranch in Australia, and they don't really know why they're there or what's going on. But they are forced to do hard work, they are treated badly, they are fed absolute crap, and we kind of get to know these women and learn what is going on. And I'm finding it really gripping. The Storygraph said it was quite slow paced, but I'm finding it really quite fast paced. And it's funny because the next book I need to read when I get home is I Who Have Never Known Men, which is also about women who have been abducted and put somewhere. So it's a weird theme to crop up in my reading, but I am really enjoying this. I'm hoping that it is going to keep me occupied on the plane. As someone who does not like flying, it's always good to have something quite gripping for a flight. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. It feels like it is definitely building to something. The nature of what is going on is changing. So yeah, feels like a good pick. It's sort of mid to late afternoon now. This evening we are going to a famous Icelandic lagoon. There's a few that are famous. I think Blue Lagoon is a really touristy one. We are going to Sky Lagoon, and there's like some sauna ritual thing that you have to do. So that's going to be quite a little bit of fun, I think. We just need to work out how we're going to get there. And then tomorrow we have got basically a clear day until our flight in the evening. So I imagine we will poodle around the city, find some good food, and just enjoy the last dregs of our holiday. So yeah, I may catch up with you again when I get home. Oh, there's just a plane flying overhead. The city is not very close to the international airport, but it is close to the domestic airport. So there's often planes flying over. But yeah, I've got to go. I've got to figure out how to get to this bloody lagoon. Bye. Yeah, so we are back now. One thing I forgot to mention is that while we were away on the Monday was a really special day called, I think this is the Icelandic pronunciation of it, Bolludagur. Although I will say, like in general with Icelandic, I really struggled to use any of the language. Often before I go somewhere, I want to learn a few words and phrases so that I can say like please, thank you, use them while I'm out there. But it was really hard. And I think it's partly because everyone has such incredible English and uses it so much, to the extent that, like, even when they're calling out order numbers in restaurants and cafes and shops and stuff, if you have to like pay and wait, they'll just say those numbers in English. But the other thing is that the sounds and the way that Icelandic is spoken, it seems to just be really difficult to my ear. Like, there are so many nuanced and unfamiliar sounds. So I really struggled with that. I don't know if it's just me. Has anyone else been to Iceland and found the same? But anyway, Bolludagur is bun day, and what they do is everyone eats these cream buns. And apparently children spank their parents demanding them in a fun way, not an angry way. And that's the last I'm going to say about spanking. Our hotel had a bakery inside and they did these amazing like swirl shaped buns, which we did have. I forgot to take a clip or a picture of them. So I'm going to see if Matt did take a picture and then I'll put it here if I've got one. And if I'm pointing at nothing, that means I don't have a picture. But trust me, they were really cool and really nice. But yeah, the trip overall was great. I read 3 books in total while I was there, and I'm just going to review each of them now for you because I had a really good trip in terms of reading. I read 3 really interesting and enjoyable books. The first book that I read, which I started on the plane, was Eurotrash by Christian Kracht, translated from German by Daniel Bowles. This is one of the long listies for the International Booker this year, and this is essentially about a middle-aged man called Christian Kracht, who is kind of a version of the author Christian Kracht, as he and his wealthy mother go on this road trip to give away 600,000 Swiss francs made in less than virtuous ways, like investments in arms companies and that sort of thing. At the start of the book, he is summoned by his mother, which sends him into a little bit of a tiz because he thinks it's going to be something serious. And you quickly get up to speed when they meet with their relationship, which is sort of dismissive and quippy, but also strangely caring. I guess it's not strange for a mother and son to care about each other, but it seems strange for these two. It seems quite difficult, but they have their ways and means. One form that care takes is Christian helping his mother with her recently fitted colostomy bag, which he wasn't aware of at all. It works as quite a nice symbol for their relationship, like the care that takes, in a way, a kind of reversal or reciprocation, given she would have changed his nappy as a baby. But it's also this really nice metaphor for what they are aiming to do on their trip, essentially trying to work through the muck and the grime of their family history to clear things out, even if they smell bad. His mother actually carries the cash they have around in a plastic bag, not her colostomy bag, I should add, and they get into all sorts of japes and capers and funny situations. There's like an attempted robbery, there's them being mistaken for people much lower down the socioeconomic scale because of how they appear. There's a portion of money that sort of comedically gets lost. It's definitely a book that plays for these laughs, but there is also a seriousness underpinning the novel, because throughout, the narrator is dealing with the guilt associated with his family's, and by extension, Switzerland's connections to Nazism. His family, their complicity, it's used as a way into Switzerland's own reckoning with its neutrality during the Second World War, despite, obviously, its geographic closeness to Germany and the inevitable ways in which German politics bled into their own politics. There were a couple of things in this book that actually spoke to me quite personally. One was just a silly one, really, that at one point they planned to go to this really, really fancy hotel in Basel called Les Trois Rois. Les Trois Rois? Les Trois Rois. Les Trois Rois. Les Trois Rois. God, that's hard to say. Anyway, this hotel I've actually been to, not as a guest, because it is mega expensive, but I used to work quite a lot in Basel, and this one time my flight home was cancelled, and somehow I ended up back in the city in the hotel bar of Le Trois, drinking this unsettlingly expensive whiskey, which thankfully I did not have to pay for. The other thing, which I actually guess is kind of reflected in that Basel experience, but also more than that, is how the book talks about reverse snobbery. So Christian's father doesn't appear in the book really, but he is discussed, and he came from quite a modest background, but made lots of money. And he just really struggled to navigate the norms of the wealthy. Because among wealthy people, especially old money, it's really not about amassing and then spending exorbitant amounts of cash. There are ways in which certain things, but only the correct things, are kept shabby and played down. And I really recognise that as someone from a working class background who was lucky enough to go to a very fancy university and later to drink whiskey in this really expensive hotel bar. Those norms of like wealthy spaces are learned in private schools, and they're taken for granted by wealthy people who grow up with money. And it can be really difficult to navigate. And the way that dissonance was described for Christian's father really rang true for me. However, all of that said, this book wasn't a complete home run. One of the core conceits of the novel is the self-insert of Kracht as the narrator. The character, like the author, had a breakout success with a novel called Faserland 25 years before this one, but I haven't read that book because it hasn't been translated into English and I can't read German. And I believe Kracht is a bit of like an enfant terrible in Swiss literature, so there's a lot in this book that kind of riffs on the real Kracht's status, but not being familiar with him, and actually not being too familiar with the sort of European autofiction literary sphere that he operates in, I found some of that hard to appreciate beyond the surface level. So, for instance, he is regularly, or not regularly, but like more than once mistaken for another author called Daniel Kahneman, and Knausgaard is also mentioned. And it's really fun that both of those authors blurb the book. So Knausgaard is on the front and Daniel Kahneman is on the back. But I couldn't respond to those things in any deeper way than thinking, oh, that sounds fun. How silly that they're mentioned in the book and they're on the covers, because I'm just not familiar enough. So I think readers who are into that genre will get a lot more out of this book. For me, it was lots of fun, had some interesting themes, but I don't think it's going to end up being my favourite from the International Booker list. Then I read Boulder by Eva Baltasar, which was translated from Catalan by Julia Sanches. This was shortlisted for the International Booker in 2023. And I read this partly because it is set in Reykjavik, which is cool, and it's always nice to read something set in the place you are. I think books are obviously very transportive, all of their own, but it really adds something to be able to feel the words on the page with more of your senses, like to be walking down a street and be like, oh, I recognise the street because it was mentioned in the book that I'm reading, and you can picture it that much more clearly, right? But I also read it because every single person I know that has read it seems to bang on about how good it is. And despite that, I wasn't totally sure if I was going to get along with it. I thought it might be one of those books that's all vibes, no plot, that kind of thing, which I don't always love. I think the writing has to be really, really, really good to capture me in a book like that. But actually, this does have a very satisfying amount of plot, and I'm happy to report that I loved it. The story is about a woman who is a cook on a cargo ship, a job that she finds really suits her because she's this fiercely independent, lonesome person. But on one of her stops on land, she meets this woman called Samsa, who she falls in love with, and who gives her the nickname Boulder. And eventually, Boulder follows Samsa to Reykjavik, where she's landed this job, and later, unexpectedly, Samsa reveals that she wants to have a child. And so the tension of the novel is in this reckoning for Boulder, like how much her life changes from the trajectory it was on, how much she can bend before she breaks. And the character names here are like no coincidence at all. Boulder, is representing something fixed and sturdy, something that stands alone. And Samsa is a reference to Kafka's metamorphosis, her changing mentally and physically to become someone strange and unfamiliar to Boulder. And that does make this sound like it is potentially a novel of ideas, something that could be quite conceptually challenging, a little bit difficult to navigate. But while it is packed with these metaphysical reflections, this big brain stuff, it's also just really, really beautifully, thrillingly written. You can turn to any page in this book and there is just beautiful language. It's actually quite remarkable to me that this is a translation, because it must be so hard to capture the precise meaning or beauty of a metaphor when changing the language. I think if you read this not knowing it was a translation, you would be hard-pressed to guess that it is. So a huge hats off to Julia Sanches for her work here, because that effortlessness in the second language is so hard won. I really loved how this novel explored what happens when you have freedom from like a certain expected trajectory for your life, like how this can be really challenging for queer people who don't have those heteronormative expectations hanging over them. So like when you're in a gay or lesbian relationship, it is just so much more obvious that you don't have to follow the normal path. But when you don't follow that path, how do you make meaning in your life? Where does that come from? And while this book doesn't have the answers, I thought it was just a really beautiful, thoughtful exploration of that, and I really highly recommend it. Finally then, I read The Natural Way of Things by Charlotte Wood. Charlotte Wood is a name you'll recognise from last year's Booker, where she was nominated for Stoneyard Devotional. It was a surprise novel from that long list that I really loved, and I wanted to read more. In this book, two women wake up in the middle of nowhere in Australia and immediately get their heads shaved. They get forced to walk miles and miles, chained to other women, and they are basically made to do like slave labour. All of these women seem to be being punished for their untoward involvement with some man or other who has power in society. And clearly the blame for these dalliances is being placed firmly on the women's shoulders. These women are treated like they are dirty, in need of re-education. When they arrive at their final destination after the miles of marching, they are fed slop and put to work, and they're controlled by this small group of kind of dodgy people. There's one guy who's just a complete arsehole. That's his main characteristic. There's this hipster guy who does yoga who seems to somehow want to portray himself as not an arsehole, but by virtue of being where he is, he obviously is an arsehole. And then there's this awful anti-feminist woman called Nancy, who is for some reason in charge of like medical stuff, but has no medical experience by the looks of it. They are all expecting the arrival of some other mysterious people, but as the days and then weeks drag on, it's clear they are not coming. There's not really this clear game plan of what to do if they don't come. And so even the captors end up not really knowing what they've signed up for or what's happening for them. What we end up with is a kind of Lord of the Flies situation as hierarchies emerge and the women all develop their own little quirks and obsessions. Compromises and agreements are made, rituals and norms emerge, and there's just a heck of a lot of misery. But for me, it was very, very worth it, although I am admittedly a lover of misery. I found all of these characters very compelling and very distinctive, despite the fact that they were being placed in a situation where they were essentially being treated as one-dimensional, low-value sluts, and they were reduced in their appearance and their dress to be very homogenous and indistinctive from one another. What's interesting is that I think many people would have written this novel with extensive flashbacks, using the women's stories as twists or reveals to keep the reader on edge. But this book doesn't do that. We get glimpses of what happened, mentions of life before their capture, but no fully drawn scenes, because it's not really the point of the book, which aims instead to look at the psychological toll of women being expected to practice virtue and shoulder the blame when it's not observed. And obviously here taken to the very extreme where they're receiving physical, corporeal punishment. I also think the writing here is really nice. Much like Stoneyard Devotional, it's very measured and thoughtful, but also very accomplished. It gets to the nub of these really complex things going on in the women's minds in the most outlandish of scenarios. The women end up doing some really weird, unhinged stuff, and I think in a lesser writer's hands, it could have come across as cartoonish or unbelievable. Charlotte Wood made me believe all of these things. Like, I could imagine this happening, which is actually quite depressing. It's not a perfect novel, though. I think there's a glaring plot hole in that the women vastly outnumber their captors, and I was frequently wondering, like, why don't they just overpower them? It doesn't make any sense. And the book acknowledges this. They do mention, like, oh, why don't we? But it doesn't answer the question in a satisfying enough way. But yeah, overall, despite that little quibble, I thought this was really great, and I now very much want to read more Charlotte Wood, so I already have the weekend lined up, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So that was my trip. Those were the books I read. I would love to hear if anyone has been to Iceland or has plans to go to Iceland and what you made of it. I'm sure there's plenty that we missed while we were there, so maybe one day we'll go back, who knows. And if you've read any of the books that I read, do let me know in the comments what you thought of them and if your thoughts were similar to mine. But yeah, overall, a great time. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do hit like, and if you'd like to see more from me, then hit subscribe. But until next time, toodles.